Hey guys, it's Dr. Ashley Southard here for another episode of Way Out Wednesday. I'm coming to you from Scottsdale, Arizona with a New Beginning Outpatient Treatment Center and the Healthy Way Out Emotional and Binge Eating Weight Loss Program. Now this month in March, I'm going to be talking about binge eating disorder and other psychiatric illnesses that are comorbid, meaning they tend to happen together. A lot of people struggling with binge eating disorder also tend to struggle with other psychological issues. So this month, I'm going to talk about 4 of the most common comorbid diagnoses that we see with binge eating disorder. Now, a study back in 2009 found that 75% of people diagnosed with binge eating disorder also struggled with another psychiatric illness. So it's very, very common for people to have more than one diagnosis. So if that's something that you've experienced in your personal life, you're definitely not alone. Now, today I want to talk about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, otherwise known as ADHD, or even sometimes referred to as ADD. Now, statistics suggest that about 30% or 1/3 of people with binge eating disorder also struggle with ADHD. And in fact, a study back in 2007 showed that girls who were diagnosed with ADHD were 4 times more likely to also have an eating disorder. 4 times. So we definitely see an overlap with binge eating disorder and ADHD. Now, I first want to talk about the criteria for ADHD so you know what I'm talking about. Now, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder has 2 main components to it. The first one is impulsivity, and the other is inattentive and hyperactivity. Now, some people are more dominant with the impulsivity side, some people are more dominant in the inattentive hyperactivity side, and then some people have a combined type where they showcase symptoms from both sides. Now, I first want to talk about the impulsivity and how that relates to binge eating disorder. Now, the impulsivity side of ADHD is really about a lack of restraint, not thinking through things very well, maybe being disorganized, not prioritizing your time, your day, your plans, okay? It's really an impairment in the executive functioning center of your brain, which is this part in the front. So it's really hard to prioritize and make plans and structure things and organize things as well as you would like. Now, how does this show up in an eating issue? Well, with binge eating disorder, we see a lot of the people struggling with ADHD have a really hard time with meal planning, and that makes a lot of sense, right? Meal planning requires organization and prioritization, and the ADHD can really get in the way of that aspect of your relationship with food. So what we find then is in people with ADHD and binge eating disorder is there's a lot of impulsivity when it comes to eating and food choices. So in the moment, rather than following a plan that they're able to execute, a binge eater might instead find themselves impulsively choosing a food to eat based on what they want right here, right now. What's available, what sounds good, what's going to make me feel better. And we might see less healthier choices being made on a more consistent basis, okay? The other thing that research is showing is that people with both ADHD and binge eating disorder seem to have a deficit in dopamine. And dopamine is the neurotransmitter in our brain that is responsible for feeling pleasure. So if you are low in dopamine, your brain knows that other chemicals can artificially increase that dopamine. And one of those chemicals is food, okay? Particularly sugar, salt, and fat. So if you couple that dopamine shortage with impulsivity, it makes a lot of sense that you might find yourself turning to fast food or turning to snacky foods or what some people call junk food as a way to get that dopamine surge right there in that impulsive moment, okay? Now, the other aspect of ADHD is the inattentiveness and the hyperactivity. So this is going to be the fidgetiness, the feeling of always being on the go, maybe run by a motor, can't really relax, can't focus on one thing, easily distracted. Now, the other side to that, though, is actually people with ADHD also experience a hyperfocus, where it's almost like tunnel vision. So you're easily distracted, but once you're into something, you can get so into it that you don't even notice anything going on around you. So you're reading that book and somebody's calling your name and you're completely oblivious to that. Okay, so we kind of see both ends of the spectrum when it comes to that focus. Now, the inattentiveness and the hyperactivity often can result in kind of a disconnect from your physical body, so not really paying attention to what is going on somatically. And for a binge eater, this can really set you up for a lot of mindless eating. Have you ever found yourself reaching for the M&M bowl at work and eating them and not even realizing you're doing it until maybe you're 4 handfuls in? Okay, so that's what we're talking about with the mindless eating. Now, with inattentiveness and hyperactivity, sometimes we also see a difficulty with regulating your own emotions. So you might get easily overwhelmed by your emotions or just easily activated and not really knowing how to regulate yourself. So between the mindlessness and the emotional dysregulation, this can really set you up for a binge at some point, turning to food as a way to calm yourself and comfort yourself and get those emotions regulated again, okay? The disconnection from the body can also make it really hard to pay attention to physical hunger cues. So knowing when your body is hungry, but also knowing when your body is satisfied, all right? So again, this can really set a binge eater up for eating for emotional and psychological reasons and not really attuning to when their body's hungry and when their body is satisfied, okay? So there's a lot of overlap here in the symptomatology of binge eating disorder and ADHD. And if you've always wondered that maybe you seem to have a lot of symptoms of ADHD and you struggle with some type of overeating or binge eating, it makes a lot of sense. There's a high percentage of overlap between these two disorders. Now, what do we do to treat these? Well, there's a lot of things that we can do that can be really helpful for the treatment of ADHD that is also then helpful for the treatment of binge eating disorder. One of the most common ones is behavioral approaches to change. So really working on setting up some ways to structure your environment and your routine so that you are more orderly and you are more organized and able to prioritize things. So people who are working on symptoms of ADHD really will create schedules and do a lot of things in their environment to make it so that they are successful in executing that schedule, that routine, or that organized way of doing things. So with children, a lot of times with their schoolwork, we'll color code different things based on their subjects. For adults, this might be having a morning routine in place that you do at the same time every morning so that you just kind of get into that rhythm. You don't even have a chance to think about whether or not you're going to do it. Another common approach to treating both ADHD and binge eating disorder is medication. And you've probably heard of ADHD medications. They're typically stimulants, and they're a stimulant because they're actually waking up that front part of your brain that gets a little sleepy. That's why the executive functioning is challenging. So it stimulates that part of the brain so that it helps you get organized and prioritize and do the things that you're planning to do. Now, there is one stimulant on the market called Vyvanse that is actually indicated for both the treatment of ADHD and the treatment of binge eating disorder. It's the only medication we have right now that is indicated for the treatment of binge eating disorder. So it does help decrease the impulsivity and the inattentiveness and hyperactivity, which can make it easier for people to really control their food choices. The caveat to taking a stimulant medication is it usually can suppress your appetite. And this can be a drawback because we really want people who are in recovery from binge eating disorder to learn how to pay attention to their body's natural hunger and satiety cues. So a medication that's going to artificially suppress your appetite is going to make that really hard. And if we pair that with emotional triggers that drive binge eating disorder, you may be more inclined then to get to a point where you're physically really hungry because your appetite's been suppressed, and you couple that then with some emotions and you may be set up for a binge. So we always want to watch that when someone's taking a stimulant medication. and they have binge eating disorder. Another form of treatment is intuitive movement, which is something we promote in our program. We know that exercise organizes the brain. So physical activity actually helps your brain work better. And so we definitely want to promote movement that is both effective for your body, but also really enjoyable. That is the definition of intuitive movement. Because once you enjoy something, you're much more likely to do it again, right? All right, and then the last piece that can be really helpful with treatment is definitely looking at the emotional and psychological aspects of both the binge eating disorder, which we promote all the time here at the Healthy Way Out, but also looking at the emotional aspects of ADHD. A lot of people who struggle with ADHD feel like they're not real smart, they're not real capable, they're not good enough because they've had different challenges with how their brain works. Maybe they've struggled in school, or maybe they have to work harder to accomplish certain things that maybe their peers or their colleagues can achieve with less work. So there definitely can be a sense of self that is hurt along the way as you're struggling with ADHD. So we definitely want to look at those emotional and psychological aspects. Okay, so I hope that this information is really helpful, maybe shedding light on some of the different things that you struggle with if you have binge eating disorder and maybe also struggle with ADHD. There's a lot of overlap. They really feed into each other, no pun intended, but thankfully there's a lot of wonderful treatment options we have to help you find lasting freedom from food. All right, I will be back here next week to talk about another very common mental disorder that a lot of people with binge eating disorder also struggle with. So stay tuned. Have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.